Hello, First Church family and friends. It is good to be with you as always. We are talking about the topic of hope. And today I'm going to be reflecting on a passage from 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 8 through 23. So I'd love for you to grab your Bible and have it opened to that passage, 2 Kings 6, 8 through 23, and be ready as we get to that point in today's reflection. This weekend, my wife and I are going to be traveling up to the White Mountains of New Hampshire. I'm officiating a wedding up there for a young couple, and I'm so excited to stand beside them on their wedding day. It's going to be a great occasion. And I realize as I think about marriage and couples standing in that moment of covenant making, that it takes great courage and hope to enter into that act of creating a covenant, especially these days. And I'm not just referring to the way in which the COVID pandemic has impacted marriages and marriage ceremonies, but I'm referring as well to the way people think about things like marriage and long, committed relationships. I think it takes great courage to stand together in the presence of God and their family and friends and to say their vows and to make this covenant commitment to one another and to God that they will follow through on the promises that they're exchanging in their wedding ceremony. When a couple stands in that moment of covenant making, they are participating in an act of hope. It's an expression of hope. This couple, they didn't just bump into each other on the street one day and then say, hey, in a few weeks, let's get married. No, that would be ridiculous. No, this couple has been together for years, and over the course of time, there have been many decisions and acts of trust that they've placed in one another that have cultivated this faith that they have in one another and this hope that they have that as they enter into the covenant of marriage, that what they're entering into is something that is trustworthy and good. And so I'm so proud of them and excited to stand beside them on this day. That history and that hope that is cultivated is what empowers a young couple to stand and exchange vows that speak into an unpredictable and unforeseeable future. And when a couple stands in that moment of their wedding ceremony, there's so much on the road that lies before them that they can't predict. That's unforeseeable. There's so many twists and turns that take place over the journey of a marriage. And yet they have hope. Hope in one another, hope, I believe, in this case, in God, that the resources are there that will carry them through all those twists and turns. What I want to talk about today is the idea that hope sees what the senses cannot. Let me repeat that. Hope sees what the senses cannot. And we'll see that played out today in this amazing story from the life of Elisha. Elisha was one of the prophets of old in the Old Testament, and his life it's like reading the story of a superhero. There are just so many amazing things that God does through the life of this man, Elisha. The reason that God is able to exercise his power through Elisha is because of Elisha's steady trust in God. Even at the very beginning of Elisha's story, when he's first introduced to us in 1 Kings, we see this deep and abiding trust that he has in God. Before Elisha comes into this role as the prophet of Israel, he had a predecessor, Elijah. And Elijah is sent by God to Elisha to call this young man into the ministry. And so Elijah finds him, and the day he finds him, Elisha is there plowing the fields of his family with 12 yoke of oxen, which, by the way, is a lot of oxen and an indication that Elisha's family was well off in their day and age. And as Elijah extends this call to Elisha from God, we see a faithful response from Elisha. To make the long story short, Elisha gets up just like the disciples whom Jesus called and said, "Come follow me." He gets up and he leaves behind that which is familiar and what his security has been based upon to that point in his life. Actually, he goes so far as to then take those 12 yoke of oxen and to sacrifice them as an offering to God. And then Elisha follows Elijah, leaving behind the comfort and convenience of his family, the safety and security of his town, and the wealth and security of his family. and he follows Elijah on this incredible adventure of faith in God. But along the way, as Elisha's story continues, we continue to see this steady response of trust in God in the different situations he finds himself in. As one example, in the story of Elisha, at a certain point he encounters a woman, and this woman is a Shunammite woman, and in her encounter with Elisha, God imparts this amazing blessing and promise to this woman that she will bear a son when she thought she couldn't. Very similar to the story of Abram and Sarah. And lo and behold, when the time comes that Elisha has stated to her, the son is born. Sometime later, we learn that this son, the son of promise, falls ill and dies. And the woman calls on Elisha for help, and he comes and again acts in such a way as to express his trust in God for provision in this situation, and the boy is brought back to life. There's joy and there's restoration that takes place. So today's story as well expresses the deep trust that Elisha had in God, the God of Israel. In today's story, there's a conflict happening between the people of Israel and a neighboring nation, the nation of Aram. And the people of Aram are invading and attacking and creating all kinds of problems for the people of Israel. But there's a problem with their efforts to invade, and the problem is Elisha. He gets insight into what this army is planning to do and communicates that insight to the king of Israel and the armies of Israel so that they're able to defend themselves. So the king of Aram sends soldiers to the city of Dothan, where Elisha lives, to take out this man of wisdom and genius and power who's thwarting his every effort. The armies arrive and surround the city of Dothan, where Elisha lives with his servant. And that morning, the servant goes outside and sees these armies surrounding the city of Dothan, and he's terrified, he's panicked. He looks out and he sees this imminent threat that's knocking on their door, and he runs into Elisha saying, "My Lord, what shall we do? What do we do? We're surrounded, there's no way out. This is the end." To which Elijah responds, beginning here in verse 16. He says, "Don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And then Elisha prays, saying, "Open the eyes of my servant, Lord, so that he may see." And then the Lord opens the servant's eyes, and he looks out and sees the hills surrounding this town, filled with horses and chariots of fire. This army that was coming against them from the nation of Aram is dwarfed by this massive army of the kingdom of heaven that's surrounding them. And the servant of Elisha sees now what Elisha is able to see through faith. But the story continues in verse 18, saying, as the enemy came down toward them, as this army from Aram continues their march against Elisha, Elijah prays to the Lord, "Strike them with blindness." And so God does that. The army is blinded. And after they enter the city, Elisha tells them when they enter the city, this is not the road. And this is not the city. You're in the wrong place. So follow me and I'll lead you to the man you're looking for. Little do they know that the one who's speaking to them is the man they're looking for. And he leads them then to Samaria, where the king and his armies are seated. After they entered the city, Elisha again prays, "Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see." And then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and there they were, inside this great enemy city, where now they are put in the position of vulnerability. And when the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, "Shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them?" Elisha responds, "Do not kill them. Would you kill those you have captured with your own sword or bow? Rather, set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink and then go back to their master." So the king prepared a great feast for these enemies. And after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away and they returned to their master. And the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. This bizarre act brought peace between these two peoples. What a great story. What a powerful example of faith in God. And what a great illustration of this idea that hope sees what the senses cannot. Hope enabled Elisha to see the armies of God, which were vastly greater than the armies of Aram. Hope enabled Elisha to see that even in this threatening situation, that God was present and that God's power was providing for him. And I think what I love even more about this story is that hope that Elisha had, that hope that was built from a history of acts of trust in God, led to a redemptive outcome, not only for Elisha and his servant and the Israelites, but also for their enemies. Fear stands in contrast to hope. Fear says things like, destroy your enemy before they can regroup and destroy you. Fear, when it's given the opportunity to fester and build up within our hearts, it fosters within us this desire to regain control. Rather than seeing the way in which God is present and providing through his power, fear leads us back toward this position of longing to be in control, so that we can act on instinct to eliminate the threat and then feel as though we've restored some semblance of peace for ourselves. It reminds me of the story of Jesus' arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. Do you remember that moment when the guards and the high priest and others come to arrest Jesus, and Peter pulls out his sword and lunges and cuts off the ear of one of the servants of the high priest? And Peter in that moment is acting out of fear, and he's taking the reins in his own hands, and rather than seeing how God is at work in this situation, Peter is lashing out of fear to somehow eliminate the threat that's come against him and Jesus. But hope, in contrast to fear, says something else. Hope says, provide your enemies with food and with water, and then send them home. It's the response that we see in Jesus. Jesus, in that moment after Peter lashes out, then reaches his hand, places it upon the head of the servant, and restores his wounded ear. That's what hope looks like lived out. It leads to restoration, even with those we might consider to be our enemies. And hope is contingent upon our trust in God and our belief that he is present and at work even when we cannot see. One of our challenges is we become so accustomed to tethering our hope to that which is tangible. We place our hope in things like bank accounts and retirement accounts and property investments and things that we can hold in our hands, and we can say to ourselves at the end of the day, I'm secure. I know I'm going to make it through another month, another year, because I have this possession in my hands. But hope, biblical hope, is placed in something different. It's placed in that which we cannot see, that which we cannot control, that which we're not sovereign over, that which we have to yield to God to show us. It reminds me of the words that the author of Hebrews writes, which speak to us so powerfully in times like this. Hebrews 11:1 reads, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for." Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction, the belief, the trust that even though we cannot see, what our hope is placed in is real. The outcome of Elisha's hope was peace with Israel's enemies. The outcome of Elisha's hope celebrated the grace and the compassion of Israel's God. It gave us a story that we can continue to tell to this day, that God is present and that God is powerful and that God is at work, even when all we can see with our senses is that which we would label enemy. Put yourselves in the shoes of the servant in today's story. The servant of Elisha looks out around the city of Dothan and sees the armies of the Arameans. And he's frightened. He panics. His response is a normal human response. It's the way that you or I would likely respond in a situation like that. It's a normal human response. But it raises some questions for us when we put ourselves into this story. The first it raises is this: what is the source of your fear today? What is the source of fear in your life today? Is it the feeling that you're purposeless? The fear that you don't have a purpose? Is it the fear of a specific situation that you're confronted with, possibly an illness or an injury or the loss of a job? Is the source of your fear today based on a relationship that's fallen apart or that's at a point of crisis? What are the threats that you are fixated on? Put yourself there in the shoes of the servant who looks out and all he can see are the armies of Aram. And he's filled with an overwhelming sense of dread and panic. And when we get in touch with those fears, when we can identify them and write them down, another question arises for us. It's the question, do I believe, do I trust, do I have hope that God is bigger than my fears? And hope, the kind of hope that we see displayed in the life of Elisha, gives us the ability to respond with a resounding yes to that question. It gives us the ability to see, maybe not with the eyes in our heads, but the eyes of our hearts, that God is present, that God's power is abundant and sufficient, and that God has a way forward for us. And let me ask this question to close. Are you willing to go the next step? Which in Elisha and his servant's story is to be at peace in the presence of your enemy, knowing that you are also in the presence of God. Because of the hope that Elisha had and the peace that it brought, and the trust that he operated out of, his response in this scenario was not to destroy the enemies who had come against them, but it was to restore. And because he acted in such a way in this scenario, we are able to see the goodness and the compassion of God at work in the lives, even of our enemies. So may your hope be like the hope of Elisha. May God grant you the ability to see his presence and his power at work in your life. May the Holy Spirit open the eyes of your heart so that you can see that God surrounds that which is causing you fear. And may you trust in the depth of your heart that God has a way forward for you, just as he did for Elisha. Amen. Hi there, this is Pastor Todd from First Church. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in and to listen to one of our reflections. We're so thankful to be able to share this journey of faith with you. Please know that we are praying for you in this time of uncertainty and challenge. And please spend more time with us. We've been putting together some great videos that we hope will encourage you and give you some spiritual sustenance in this time to continue to trust in Jesus and to walk with him. So please take a moment to browse through our YouTube channel and check out some more of our videos and click on some of the links below to our website to see what's happening in our midst. We'd love to have you be a part of the journey with us. Take care and God bless you.